And if you were always left scratching your head at this idea in terms of how this relates to real and actual magic or alchemical practices, then we can definitely say this plot element of soul splitting in Silent Hill only exists in the series to move the story along. It has no real significance in terms of alchemy or magic whatsoever. And so, contrary to popular misconception, even magical spells are bound by the laws of physics and metaphysics alike. Real magic isn't just mumbo jumbo or anything goes. In other words, magic cannot operate beyond that which exceeds the very fundamental structure of reality itself. Reality being inclusive of the spiritual and corporeal levels of existence. Now, in the beginning sequence of the game, we're offered the familiar territory of a haunting sense of déjà vu, as it were. A sense that the world of nightmares and the waking reality are somehow converging for Heather Mason. Just like her adopted father, Harry, Heather has her own dreamlike vision of herself being pursued and killed right at the beginning of the game. Only this time we are shown that Heather is struck by the roller coaster car, which offers the player a subtle reprise or a subtle cue of Alessa appearing to be struck by Harry's car in the first game. So it's a very interesting play of perspective. Only this time the story is being retold through the memory of Alessa Gillespie and reimagined by Heather or Cheryl Mason, if you prefer. I think approaching the story from this perspective opens up some very compelling possibilities. The reason we know that Silent Hill 3 is being told from Alessa's perspective is because of the very first thing we are shown in the game's opening sequence. You have to ask yourself, why exactly are we being shown the carousel and the creepy horse in the very first scene of the game? So many great stories, films, games will do this, where the very first opening scene basically tells you about the entire story. And this opening scene in Silent Hill, I think it's often, in Silent Hill 3, is often overlooked, but there's a very important message being told to us right from the beginning. We're shown this because this is the place where Heather must confront the memory of Alessa. This is what the story's all about. And she has to confront Alessa in all of her torment and anguish, and she has to incorporate that dark side of herself if she is to, progress in the story and move on. So this opening scene also serves to set the tone of the game, which takes a different approach from its predecessors according to Team Silent. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Additionally, the top-down view of the teacups closely resembles the halo of the sun, which we're going to look at as well. And it's a symbol which is used to beckon and control the memory of Alessa. Just like the first Silent Hill game, Heather wakes up in a restaurant. The light is awash in orange and red, which was intended as a subtle cue to the player that things aren't really what they seem to be. Perhaps this business about the soul splitting and soul rejoining was purposefully introduced to add to the ambiguity that Heather and the player are meant to experience throughout the entire game. Also, who would actually fall asleep at a fast food joint like Happy Burger anyway? Something definitely isn't right here. All signs indicate that some serious effort has been put into putting the player off balance right from the very beginning of the game. Also, of course, notice the locket that Heather is wearing, which contains the Aglaophotis. This is something we will look at in greater detail later on. Back to setting the tone of this game for a moment. About this, a member of Team Silent remarks, "For Silent Hill 3, a different approach was used. We wanted to create a more violent, direct feeling of fear. Unlike Silent Hill 2, where the emphasis was on the deep dimensions of the unconscious, Silent Hill 3 explores the depths of fear in a more visceral, instinctual, and animalistic sense. In other words, Silent Hill 3 aims to induce fear through the pathways of human biology. Done in this way, the triggers of this primordial fear play upon the most fundamental instinct shared between humans and all the animals alike. And this instinct that they're playing with, of course, is survival. Now, our self-preservation instincts are a set of behaviors which aim to ensure the survival of the organism and the species at large. This instinct is universally found in all creatures and is certainly the most powerful instinct of them all. So powerful, in fact, that it is believed by many to be the basis for most of our behavior. In modern human beings, attractiveness, social status, sex, as well as the fear of inadequacy and the fear of the general dangers in the world are all factors in this powerful self-preservation instinct. Those claiming to have lost this drive are merely psychologizing low levels of self-worth. Biologically, these instincts remain intact 97% of the time statistically, as only 3% of people who actually attempt suicide, for example, actually succeed. So if you think about that, only 3% of people that attempt suicide are actually going to succeed. And of course, this is because it's pretty well known that people at the last possible second will pull back because their survival instincts are overriding what they're trying to do to themselves. And this hardwired biological drive of self-preservation can only be fully released on death. What many Silent Hill fans may not recognize is that the lowest egoic animal instincts within us account for much of the fascination and fetishism people have with survival horror in the first place. In other words, these fear-inducing triggers of our base-level sympathetic nervous system feed and reinforce the egoic sense of self at the level of the psyche. These instinctual triggers enter into the human intellect through these primordial pathways and are then heavily psychologized in the human mind, leaving the unaware to falsely believe this dynamic is somehow born at the level of the self or the ego. In other words, our animal instincts can easily override our psychology. There may be every manner of psychological rationale used to deny this common biological denominator which can hijack our thoughts and emotions. However, that would merely represent the delusional protests of that pesky ego. The ego is built upon fear. It is not built on love. The ego serves to protect us from danger by way of distinguishing self from other. Now, we need the ego. No one's saying the ego is bad, but if the ego is controlling you, well, that's not an optimal situation. Now, love is quite the opposite dynamic, where little distinction is made between self and other. Of course, we need this fear trigger in order to survive, and we need love in order to thrive. In this sense, fear is absolutely informed by our biology as a way of protecting us. But when the instincts are married to the human intellect, then a false sense of self in terms of our own mental image of who we think we are can easily creep in and take hold. A self which unconsciously identifies with its suffering as part of one's identity is a rather convincing mental image that so many desperately cling to. They do not realize that their own biology has hijacked their mind and is really running the show for most of the decisions that they're making in their lives.